Close your eyes and step back 1,000 years into a world both familiar and strange. This is medieval Europe, a land of quiet villages and towering castles, of fields stretching to the horizon, of cathedrals rising like stone forests against the sky. It was a time when faith guided every step, when kings and peasants alike believed their lives were shaped by the will of heaven. The Middle Ages stretched across centuries, from the fall of Rome to the dawn of the Renaissance. It was an age of contrasts, of hardship and wonder, of learning and superstition, of disease and devotion. To live then was to endure both the weight of labor and the beauty of tradition, to find meaning in seasons, rituals, and stories told by firelight. Tonight, we will wander gently through that world. We will walk the muddy paths of peasant villages, sit in the halls of kings, climb the walls of castles, and bow our heads in monasteries filled with chanting. We will see knights in shining armor and hear the silence of fields struck by plague. Let the modern world fade. Breathe slowly. Feel the cool, damp air of an old stone village, the distant tolling of a church bell, the faint smell of smoke and earth. Welcome to medieval Europe. For most people, the Middle Ages were not lived in palaces or castles. They were lived in small villages, scattered across fields and forests, where men and women rose each day to work the soil that barely sustained them. To be a medieval peasant was to know toil, hunger, and struggle, yet also to find small comforts in community and faith. Imagine dawn breaking over a village. The sky is pale, the ground wet with dew. A rooster crows, dogs bark, and smoke curls from thatched roofs. Inside a simple hut, a family stirs from sleep. Their bed is straw, their blankets rough wool. A fire smolders in the hearth, giving off more smoke than heat. Breakfast is a crust of bread, perhaps softened in ale, or thin broth, simple, plain, enough to carry them into the day. The fields await. Men shoulder wooden plows, oxen straining in harnesses. Women bend low, sowing seeds, their hands cracked from labor, their backs aching. Children scatter to gather firewood, herd geese, or scare crows from the crops. Every hour is bound to the land, for the harvest is the difference between life and hunger. Clothing is simple. Rough linen tunics, patched many times, wooden clogs, or leather shoes worn thin. A cloak against the rain, heavy and damp, smelling faintly of wool and earth. Life is ruled by seasons. In spring, planting. In summer, tending. In autumn, harvest. In winter, survival. Food stores are rationed carefully. Salted pork, if it was a good year. Turnips and cabbage, if it was not. Hunger is common. Sickness frequent. Comfort rare. Yet peasants were not entirely without joy. Festivals marked the calendar feasts at Christmas, songs at harvest, dances on holy days. The church bells called them to gather, to pray, to find solace in faith. Storytellers and traveling musicians brought laughter, weaving tales of saints, knights, and distant lands. Still, life was bound to duty. Most peasants worked not their own land, but the fields of a lord, giving part of their harvest as rent. They could not leave without permission, tied to soil as firmly as the crops they grew. Now picture the village at night. The fields are silent, the stars cold above. Families huddle close by the hearth, children drifting to sleep as elders whisper prayers. Outside, the church bell tolls softly, echoing across the dark. The life of a medieval peasant was harsh, but it was steady. familiar, shaped by the rhythm of earth and heaven alike. In the long sweep of medieval Europe, few figures loom as large as Charlemagne Charles the Great. To his people, he was more than a king. He was a unifier, a warrior, a patron of learning, and the very image of Christian kingship. His life was sung in chronicles and remembered in legend, for in an age often fractured, he forged something vast and lasting. Imagine him as a young man, tall and broad, with fair hair and piercing eyes. He was born in 742, the son of Pepin, the short ruler of the Franks. From his earliest days, his world was filled with war and prayer, steel and scripture. For Europe at this time was a patchwork of kingdoms, tribes, and shifting loyalties. To lead was to fight, to command was to endure. When his father died, Charlemagne inherited not just a crown, but a fractured realm, shared with his brother Carloman. But soon Carloman was gone, and Charles ruled alone, his power stretching over the Frankish lands. He began to expand, not by chance, but by design. Picture his armies marching, lines of warriors in mail, banners snapping in the wind, swords at their sides, lances held high. They crossed rivers and mountains, battling Saxons in the north, Lombards in Italy, Avars in the east. Each victory brought more land under his banner, and with it the weight of responsibility. Charlemagne was not only a conqueror, he saw himself as the protector of Christendom. When the Pope in Rome faced threats, Charlemagne marched to his aid, and in the year 800, on Christmas Day, he entered St. Peter's Basilica. Imagine the great church, its incense thick in the air, candles flickering against marble columns. As Charles knelt in prayer, the Pope placed upon his head a crown, and the people shouted, "Long life and victory to Charles, crowned by God, great and peace-bringing Emperor of the Romans." In that moment, the Holy Roman Empire was born. The echo of Rome returned, reshaped in Christian form, and at its head stood Charlemagne. Yet his greatness was not only in battle or ceremony. He cared for learning and culture in a time often called dark. He gathered scholars at his court, men who copied ancient texts, taught grammar, astronomy, and scripture. He encouraged the building of schools in monasteries, so that boys might learn not only to fight, but to read and write. The script we still use today in much of your clear, rounded, easy to read, was spread through his influence, known as Carolingian minuscule. At home, Charlemagne lived simply for a king. He wore plain clothes, ate roasted meat and bread, and drank water more often than wine. He was both ruler and father, firm but affectionate. His many children gathered around him. He ruled for over 4 decades, shaping a realm that stretched across modern France, Germany, Italy, and beyond. When he died in 814, he was buried in Aachen, the city he loved, in a chapel he himself had built. There he rests still, beneath stone arches that echo with the prayers of centuries. Charlemagne's empire did not last unchanged. After his death, it fractured, divided among heirs, yet his memory endured. To later kings, he was the model. To churchmen, the protector. To his people, the great ruler whose vision briefly held Europe together. Now picture the night after his crowning. Outside St. Peter's, the streets of Rome lie quiet, the stars bright above. Inside, the candles burn low. The crown rests upon his head, and Charlemagne prays softly, his voice steady, his heart full. He could not know how his name would echo across 1,000 years, but he knew, even then, that he had stepped into history. If the village was the heart of medieval life, the castle was its symbol, rising high above fields and rivers, built of stone and sweat. Castles were both fortresses and homes. They guarded the land, sheltered the nobility, and projected power to all who looked upon them. Imagine approaching a castle in the 12th century. The air is damp, the road muddy beneath your boots. Ahead, stone towers rise against the sky, their walls thick and gray, banners snapping in the wind. A moat encircles the fortress, its water dark and still, crossed only by a wooden drawbridge. As you walk closer, the echo of footsteps on the planks, the creak of chains, and the groan of the gatehouse fill your ears. Passing beneath the portcullis, you step into another world. Inside, the courtyard bustles with life. Blacksmiths hammer at anvils, sparks flashing into the air. Chickens scatter between women carrying baskets of vegetables. Children chase one another, their laughter rising among the stone walls. Soldiers drill with spears, their voices shouting in rhythm. Though the castle is a fortress, it is also a village within walls, alive with its own daily rhythm. Climb higher into the keep, the great tower at the castle's heart. Its walls are cold and thick, its halls lit by flickering torches. The lord and lady sit at long tables, their meals of roasted meat, bread, and wine spread before them. Above hangs a tapestry, bright with images of saints and battles, its colors soft in the firelight. At night, the great hall fills with music harps, flutes, the steady beat of drums, while jesters and poets entertain the household. Yet castles were not only about comfort, they were about defense. Their walls were designed to withstand sieges, their towers to provide vantage. Imagine the silence of night, broken by the alarm of an approaching army. Archers hurried to the battlements, stones and boiling water prepared for attackers. The Lord commands from the walls, his armor glinting in torchlight. For weeks, perhaps months, the castle could hold its granaries and wells, sustaining those within. Archaeologists today still uncover the mysteries of these fortresses. In the ruins of keeps and dungeons, they find pottery shards, iron nails, coins lost between stones. They discover secret passages carved into walls, hidden chambers where treasures may have been stored, or where families sheltered in times of danger. Each stone tells a story of laborers who carried it, of masons who shaped it, of centuries of eyes that watched from its towers. But castles were not only military strongholds, they were also symbols. Two peasants working the land below, the sight of a castle was both protection and reminder. Protection from raiders, reminder of the Lord's power. Its shadow fell across the fields. Its bells and horns summoned men to duty. Now picture a castle at dusk. The sun sets behind its towers, painting the sky in gold and crimson. Torches flicker along the walls, their flames mirrored in the moat. The sound of the chapel bell drifts across the air, calling the household to evening prayer. Inside, the great hall glows with firelight, while outside, the fields fall silent, darkening under the shadow of stone. The castle was never only walls and towers. It was life contained in stone, a world within a world, a symbol of strength and endurance. Though many now lie in ruins, their broken arches and crumbling walls still speak of an age when they were alive, filled with voices, laughter, and the steady rhythm of medieval life. In the Middle Ages, Society itself was shaped like a great pyramid, with each level resting upon the one below. This structure, known as the feudal system, defined how people lived, worked, and served one another. To understand medieval Europe is to understand this chain of duty and dependence, a system both strict and enduring. At the very top stood the king. Imagine him seated upon a throne, draped in furs and crowned with gold. His voice was law, his hand the hand of God upon earth, or so it was believed. Yet his power did not flow evenly across his realm. Instead, it stretched outward like branches of a tree through the hands of those beneath him. The king granted great tracts of land to his most loyal nobles, the lords. In return, these lords swore oaths of loyalty and service. Picture a ceremony. A noble kneels before the king, places his hands within the king's, and swears to protect, to fight, to serve. The king, in turn, grants him land of fief. With land came power, wealth, and the right to govern those who lived upon it. Beneath the lords were the vassals, knights, and lesser nobles, who received smaller pieces of land in exchange for their loyalty. They trained in the art of war, rode upon armored horses, and carried swords to defend their lord's honor. Their duty was clear. When called, they fought. When summoned, they served. And in return, they too enjoyed land, privilege, and protection. At the base of the system were the serfs, the peasants who worked the land, bound not by chains but by obligation. They were tied to the soil as firmly as the crops they grew. A serf could not simply leave his lord's land. He was expected to plow, to sow, to harvest, and to provide the food that sustained all above him. In return, he received protection from raiders, and the small comfort of knowing that while his labor was endless, it was also secure. The system was not equal, nor was it gentle. Yet it provided order in a world that might otherwise collapse into chaos. Each person, from king to serf, knew his place, his duties, and his rights. And though the burden was heavy for those at the bottom, the structure endured for centuries, its rhythm shaping the lives of millions. Imagine a manor on a summer day. The Lord walks through his hall, speaking with his steward about taxes. In the courtyard, a knight sharpens his sword, preparing for the next call to arms. Outside the walls, peasants bend in the fields, their backs aching, their hands rough. All live within the same land, yet their worlds are vastly different. The Lord feasts in stone halls, the knight rides beneath banners. The serf eats bread of coarse grain and prays for good weather. And yet, all are bound together, each dependent upon the other. Now picture the manor at dusk. The fields grow quiet, the oxen are led into their pens, and the peasants return to their huts, tired but steady. In the hall, torches glow, music plays faintly. Above it all, the church bell rings, reminding each soul of heaven's order, as firm and unyielding as the feudal system itself. The Middle Ages were not equal, but they were ordered. Lords, vassals, and serfs formed the great chain of society, each link tied to the next. And though the centuries have passed, the memory of that order still lingers, carved into castles, whispered in chronicles, shaping the very fabric of Europe's history. In the Middle Ages, faith was not only a matter of prayer, but of destiny. It shaped lives, guided kings, and often called entire nations into movement. Nowhere is this clearer than in the Crusades, those long journeys of knights, peasants, and pilgrims who marched east in the name of God. It began in the late 11th century. Imagine a vast crowd gathered in a square, the air cold, the banners of the church fluttering above. Pope Urban II stands before them, his voice carrying across the sea of people. He speaks of the Holy Land, of Jerusalem, a city sacred to Christians, Muslims, and Jews alike. He calls upon the faithful to take up the cross, to march eastward, to reclaim holy places for Christendom. His words ignite a fire that spreads quickly across Europe. Knights sew red crosses onto their cloaks. Peasants, with no armor and little food, set out with faith alone. Entire families join caravans that stretch across fields and forests, moving slowly toward lands they have never seen. To them, the journey is both pilgrimage and war, both sacred duty and desperate hope. Picture the march itself, the sound of boots on dusty roads, the creak of wagons, the steady murmur of prayer. Days blur into weeks, weeks into months. Along the way, they face hunger, sickness, exhaustion. Yet still, they walk, guided by the promise of salvation, the belief that their suffering brings them closer to heaven. When they reached the east, they encountered not only enemies, but cultures vast and rich, cities of stone and marble, markets alive with spices and silks, languages and faiths unlike their own. For some, it was a shock. For others, a revelation. The clash of armies was fierce. Yet in the spaces between battles, there was also trade, exchange, and moments of uneasy coexistence. The Crusades were not a single event, but a series spanning centuries, led by kings and commoners alike. Some succeeded for a time, carving out small kingdoms in the east. Others failed, ending in exhaustion, loss, and retreat. For those who fought, the experience was often less about glory and more about hardship: the long marches, the sieges that lasted months, the heat of the sun, the fear of the unknown. Back in Europe, the Crusades left deep marks. They strengthened the power of the church, inspired tales and songs, and opened new pathways of trade. Spices, fabrics, and knowledge flowed westward, mingling with the rhythms of daily life. Yet they also brought sorrow, division, and a legacy of conflict that echoes still in memory. Now, picture the scene at night. A camp of crusaders rests beneath a dark sky. Tents cluster around fires, where men sit in silence, their armor set aside, their hands clasped in prayer. Beyond, the stars wheel silently, uncaring of battles below. Some sleep, dreaming of Jerusalem, of home, of peace. Others stay awake, watching the horizon, waiting for dawn. The Crusades were born of faith, sustained by hope, and remembered for both courage and tragedy. They remind us that the Middle Ages were an age not only of struggle, but of longing to find heaven upon earth, even through the hardest of journeys. In the middle of the 14th century, Europe faced a shadow unlike any before. It was called the Black Death, a plague that moved swiftly across towns and villages, carried on ships, borne by fleas, and unseen in the breath of the air. Within only a few years, it would claim millions of lives, changing the course of history forever. Imagine a small medieval town before the sickness came. The market square bustles with voices. The smell of bread and roasting meat fills the air. Merchants call out their wares. Children chase one another in narrow alleys, their laughter echoing between timbered houses. But then whispers spread news of illness from distant ports, rumors of ships arriving with crews already dead. Fear grows quietly, like a storm gathering at the horizon. Soon, the sickness reaches the town itself. At first, a few fall ill, their strength failing suddenly. Then more. The streets grow quiet, the market empty. The tolling of church bells becomes constant, a sound of mourning that drifts through the air like mist. Families shut themselves indoors, hoping to keep death from their doors. Yet still it creeps in. Daily life, once ruled by the rhythm of farming, trade, and prayer, collapses into survival. Crops go unharvested, shops remain closed, fields lie empty. In villages, the silence of abandoned homes becomes more common than the sound of work or laughter. Those who remain healthy must labor not only for themselves, but for the dead, digging graves, ringing bells, caring for the sick. And yet, even in this shadow, life endured. Priests prayed for the souls of the dying. Monks tended to the sick in cloisters. Families clung to one another for comfort. Some believed the plague was a punishment from heaven. Others searched for earthly causes in the stars, in the air, in the very soil beneath their feet. Imagine the resilience it required to wake each morning, not knowing what the day would bring. To step outside and see empty streets, to hear the bell tolling once again, to feel the weight of uncertainty in every breath. And still, people did what they could. They baked bread, they mended clothes, they told stories by candlelight, they sang hymns in quiet voices, searching for strength in familiar rituals. The Black Death reshaped Europe. Entire villages vanished, labor became scarce, and the structure of society shifted. But it also left behind lessons of endurance, that even in darkness, communities sought connection, that even in fear, people turned to one another and to faith for meaning. Now picture the town at dusk. The streets are still, the doors closed, but a single candle glows in a window. Inside, a family gathers, their hands joined in prayer, their voices soft. Outside, the air is quiet, the stars bright and distant, the night carrying both sorrow and a fragile thread of hope. The Black Death was one of humanity's darkest trials, yet from it, Europe eventually emerged. Its memory lingers, not as horror alone, but as a reminder of resilience, of the quiet strength found in daily struggle, even when the world seems to fall silent. In the vast span of the Middle Ages, life was not lived only in castles or battlefields. Most of it unfolded quietly in the home, where women and families sustained the rhythm of daily existence. To understand medieval society, one must step into the courtyards, kitchens, and hearths where lives were shaped in small, steady ways. Imagine a modest village house. Its walls are wattle and daub, the roof thatched, smoke drifting slowly from the chimney. Inside, the air smells faintly of bread baking on the hearth, mingled with the earthy scent of damp straw. A woman tends the fire, her sleeves rolled back, while children sit nearby, weaving rushes into mats or helping grind grain in a heavy stone mill. For most women, daily life was defined by labor. They rose with the sun, prepared meals, cared for children, spun wool, and wove cloth. In the fields, they worked beside men, sowing, harvesting, and tending animals. Their hands were rarely idle. Even in the quiet of winter, they mended clothing, preserved food, and brewed ale for the household. Marriage was often arranged, a bond between families as much as between individuals. Weddings were marked by feasts and prayers, with gifts of dowry exchanged. A wife's role was to manage the household, to support her husband's work, and most importantly, to bear children who would continue the family line. Motherhood was honored, but it carried heavy risks. Childbirth was dangerous, and many mothers faced loss alongside joy. Yet women also held quiet forms of power. In towns, widows could run shops, own property, or practice trades. In noble households, ladies managed estates when lords were away at war, overseeing servants, accounts, and harvests. Some women joined convents, dedicating their lives to God, becoming nuns, abbesses, or even writers and scholars within cloistered walls. Hildegard of Bingen, for example, wrote music, visions, and natural philosophy that still survives today. Family life was the anchor of medieval society. Grandparents, parents, and children often lived together, bound by duties of care and respect. Children were raised not with indulgence, but with expectation. Boys trained for trades or service, girls prepared for household responsibilities. Yet childhood was not without joy. Games of sticks and balls, songs by the fire, tales told by traveling minstrels that carried imaginations far beyond the village. In noble families, life carried different rhythms. A lady of the manor might supervise dozens of servants, oversee weaving halls, and host feasts. Daughters could be married into alliances, their futures shaped by politics and wealth. Yet even here, within halls hung with tapestries, the rhythm of life was steady births, marriages, and deaths, each woven into the great fabric of the family. Now picture such a family at night. A mother hums softly as she spins thread by the fire, her children drowsing at her side. A father sets aside his tools, resting in the glow of the hearth. Grandparents sit quietly, telling stories of saints and heroes from memory. Outside, the village is dark, the church bell marking the hour, the stars cold and steady above. This was medieval family life, hard, bound by duty, yet filled with bonds of care and continuity. Women held it together with labor and patience. Families gave it shape with tradition and faith. And though centuries have passed, the warmth of a hearth, the closeness of kin, and the quiet love within simple homes still echo through time. In medieval Europe, no force shaped daily life more deeply than the church. From the grandest cathedral to the smallest village chapel, from the Pope in Rome to the humblest parish priest, the church's presence was constant, guiding, comforting, and sometimes controlling. Imagine a small village at dawn. The first sound is not the rooster, but the tolling of the church bell, calling the faithful to prayer. The church itself is modest stone walls, a wooden roof, a simple altar lit by candles. Inside, peasants kneel on cold floors, whispering prayers in Latin words they do not always understand. Yet the ritual itself carries power, binding the community together in shared devotion. For the people of the Middle Ages, life was seen through the lens of faith. Birth was marked by baptism, marriage by blessing, death by the last rites, and burial in holy ground. Feast days and holy days filled the calendar. Christmas, Easter, saints' days each, bringing both obligation and moments of joy. To live outside the church's rhythm was unthinkable, for it was not only a guide to the soul, but also the center of community life. Beyond the village stood the monasteries' quiet worlds of stone cloisters, gardens, and scriptoria, where monks and nuns lived apart from the world. Imagine stepping into such a place. The air is cool. The halls echo with the soft sound of sandals on stone. At dawn, the monks gather in the chapel, their voices rising in chant, steady and low, like the rhythm of the sea. Their days are ordered by bells: prayer, work, study, rest. Monks preserved knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. In scriptoria, they bent over parchment, copying ancient texts by candlelight. The scratch of quills on vellum filled the silence, each page illuminated with bright colors, gold leaf shimmering like sunlight on water. Thanks to their work, writings of the Romans, the Greeks, and the Church Fathers survived the centuries. Monasteries were also places of healing. Their gardens grew herbs for medicine mint, for the stomach, sage for the blood, lavender for calm. Their infirmaries tended the sick. Their hospitality welcomed travelers. For many, monasteries were havens of order in a world often uncertain and harsh. At the highest level, the church held immense power. The Pope crowned kings, settled disputes, and could excommunicate rulers, cutting them off from the sacraments and, in the eyes of the faithful, from salvation itself. Bishops and abbots controlled vast lands and wealth, their cathedrals rising above towns as symbols of both faith and authority. Picture one of those great cathedrals. Its spires stretched toward heaven, its stained glass windows glowing with colors that dance upon the stone floor. The sound of organ music fills the air, soaring upward like wings. For the common peasant who entered such a place, it was overwhelming proof of God's greatness and of the church's place upon earth. Yet the church was not only grandeur, it was also personal. The priest who baptized a child, the monk who prayed for the dead, the nun who taught letters to village children. Its presence touched every life, whether in small blessings or grand ceremonies. Now picture a monastery at night. The courtyard is silent, the stars bright above. A single candle glows in the scriptorium, where a monk continues to copy lines of scripture, his hand steady, his lips whispering the words as he writes. In the chapel, the last prayer of the day lingers, echoing into silence. The world beyond may be restless, but here, within stone walls, there is peace. The church was the heart of medieval life, sometimes a source of comfort, sometimes a weight of authority, but always present. It gave shape to time, meaning to suffering, and hope for eternity. When we think of medieval Europe, one of the most vivid images is that of the knight-clad in steel, riding upon a great horse, sword flashing in the sun. But behind the romance of legend lay a life of duty, discipline, and hardship, shaped by the code of chivalry and the spectacle of tournaments. Imagine a young boy of noble birth. At the age of 7, he is sent away from his home to live in the household of another lord. There he becomes a page, learning the basics of courtesy, serving at table, carrying messages, and watching carefully as older squires train in arms. At 14, he himself becomes a squire, tasked with caring for a knight's armor and horse, practicing with wooden swords, learning the weight of shield and lance. Only after years of service, if he proves both skillful and honorable, will he kneel and receive the accolade of knighthood. Sword tapped upon his shoulders, an oath sworn to God and to his lord. The knight's duty was not only to fight, he was bound by chivalry, a code that demanded loyalty to one's lord, defense of the weak, courtesy to women, and devotion to God. Though often broken in practice, the ideals of chivalry shaped how knights saw themselves, turning warriors into figures of both fear and admiration. Picture a knight in armor. His body is sheathed in mail or plate, the metal gleaming in sunlight. Upon his shield is a coat of arms, bright with symbols of his family and honor. His horse wears a caparison of cloth, its hooves thundering as it charges. To see such a figure ride across a field was to witness both power and pageantry, a moving symbol of medieval might. And yet, knights did not live only for war. In times of peace, they tested their skills in tournaments. Imagine a field set aside for the games. Crowds gather, banners ripple in the wind, and trumpets sound. Knights line up with lances, their shields bright, their helmets adorned with crests. With a cry, two riders spur their horses forward, lances lowered, dust rising as wood crashes against wood, shields splintering with the force of the blow. The crowd cheers, nobles clap, and the contest continues. Tournaments were more than sport. They were displays of wealth and power, chances for knights to win favor, to prove themselves before ladies and lords. They were dangerous. 2 broken bones and even death were not uncommon, but they carried a thrill that brought communities together, filling fields with music, laughter, and the shimmer of armor. Knights also served beyond the battlefield. They escorted pilgrims, guarded castles, and acted as symbols of order in a world often uncertain. Yet their lives were not only glory. Armor was heavy, battles exhausting, the weight of loyalty sometimes crushing. A knight's fate was tied to his lord, his honor to his oaths. Now picture a tournament field at dusk. The crowd disperses, the trumpets fall silent, and the dust settles. Knights remove their helmets, their hair damp with sweat, their faces weary but proud. Horses are led away. Armor is carried back to tents. In the great hall that evening, the contests are remembered in song, the names of champions spoken with admiration. The knight remains one of the enduring symbols of the Middle Ages, part warrior, part noble, part dream. His sword defended, his code guided, his tournaments entertained. And though the age of knights has passed, the image endures, glowing still in stories, legends, and the quiet memory of steel flashing beneath a medieval sun. The Middle Ages stretched across nearly 1,000 years, but like all eras, it too came to an end. Slowly, change crept into Europe through new ideas, inventions, and discoveries that carried people from the medieval world into what would be called the Renaissance. Imagine Europe in the 14th and 15th centuries. The Black Death had swept through, leaving villages abandoned and fields empty. Labor was scarce, wages began to rise, and the rigid structure of feudalism began to loosen. Serfs found new freedoms, cities grew stronger, and merchants gained influence. Their wealth built on trade that stretched farther than ever before. In Italy, scholars turned once more to the writings of the ancient Greeks and Romans. They studied philosophy, science, and art with fresh eyes, believing that humanity itself was worthy of study and praise. Cathedrals that once rose as fortresses of faith gave way to airy domes and graceful arches, their walls filled with paintings that celebrated both heaven and earth. Inventions reshaped daily life. The printing press spread knowledge at a speed never before imagined. Compass and improved ships carried explorers across oceans, opening pathways to new worlds. Gunpowder changed the nature of war, rendering castles and armored knights less powerful than they had been. The very symbols of the Middle Ages feudal lords, mounted warriors, stone fortresses, slowly faded into memory. The church, still powerful, faced new challenges. Voices rose against its authority, calling for reform. Kings grew stronger, shaping nations that would define the modern map of Europe. And through it all, the people of the land farmers, craftsmen, merchants, scholars found themselves in a world that was changing faster than their ancestors could have dreamed. Yet the Middle Ages did not vanish entirely. Its echoes remain in the villages still scattered across the continent, in the cathedrals that continue to rise above city squares, in the castles whose ruins mark the hills. The stories of knights, saints, peasants, and kings still linger, carried in legend and song. Now picture a medieval village at twilight, one last time. Smoke curls from chimneys, bells ring softly in the church tower, and families gather around their hearths. They do not know that their age is ending. To them, life continues as it always has, season to season, prayer to prayer. But history is shifting, carrying them toward a new dawn. And so, our journey through medieval Europe comes to its close. We have walked the muddy paths of peasants, stood in the halls of kings, climbed the walls of castles, and prayed in quiet monasteries. We have heard the clash of crusaders, the whispers of plague, the vows of knights, and the songs of families gathered by firelight. The Middle Ages were not only an age of hardship, but of endurance. They were not only a time of shadow, but of faith, resilience, and the steady rhythm of daily life. Their world was different from ours, yet not so distant for we to seek meaning, comfort, and belonging in our own ways. As you rest now, let the echoes of this age soften in your mind. Picture the quiet of a medieval courtyard, the flicker of a candle in a stone chapel, the sound of a harp played in a great hall. Let those images fade slowly, like smoke rising into the night sky. The Middle Ages are gone, but their stories remain. And tonight, they carry you not into battle or labor, but gently into sleep. Like the tolling of a distant bell, steady and calm, they guide you into the quiet peace of dreams.